The economy. Is the storm coming for the US, Europe, and China? The term recessions, which usually defines 2 consecutive quarters of a shrinking economy, has been floating around the media like it's out of date. According to recent headlines and next rhetoric, we have arrived. However, the truth, like many other things, is more nuanced. To be sure, no one in their right mind wants to see a recession, which is usually accompanied by higher unemployment and lower corporate profits. So, is the global economy heading for a perfect storm, with Europe, China, and the United States all experiencing downturns later this year? Stay tuned till the end of this video to find out. And since you're here, please do well give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to hit the subscribe button as well. With that being said, let's get started. Now, the risks of a global recession's trifecta are increasing by the day. A gas shock in Europe, sharp interest rates increases in the US, never-ending lockdowns, and severe real estate crisis in China. The major engines of the global economy are stalling or even going into the red one by one. Globally, the clouds of recessions are gathering. A long cold winter is on the way for consumers. A concerning consensus among economists is emerging. The Eurozone will be in recessions by the end of the year. The United States may be able to avoid it, but it will not be able to avoid a significant slowdown. China's growth, which has been the engine of the global economy for the past quarter century, has never been more precarious. A European recession is almost certain if the conflict in Ukraine escalates and Germany, which has since resisted calls to cut off Russian oil and gas, finally gives in. In the face of draconian COVID-19 lockdowns, and have already brought Shanghai to a halt and now threaten Beijing, China is finding it increasingly difficult to sustain positive growth. Indeed, the Chinese economy may already be in a slump, and with US consumer prices rising at their fastest rate in 40 years, the prospect of a soft landing for prices without a significant hit to growth appears increasingly remote. Private and official economic forecasts have recently begun to highlight rising regional risks, but they may underestimate the extent to which they compound one another. In the short run, widespread lockdowns in China, for example, will disrupt global supply chains, raising inflations in the US and lowering demand in Europe. Normally, lower commodity prices would alleviate these issues. However, with no clear end in the sight in Ukraine, global food and energy prices are likely to remain high regardless of the outcome. If the Chinese leadership makes the wrong decisions on COVID-19, no amount of careful macroeconomic stewardship will save the day. As I previously stated, gas supply to Europe has become more uncertain as a result of Russia's decisions to cut flows to many countries. Supply chain disruptions caused by China's zero-COVID policy continue to weigh on growth expectations. According to Consensus Economics, which tracks growth and inflation forecasts, the Fed's rise prompted private sector economists to downgrade their US forecasts for 2023 by the largest margin this year, with even larger downgrades than those made at the start of the Ukraine war. The near-term inflation's picture does not look good, implying that the central bank may need to raise rates even more aggressively than currently anticipated. Since then, the bank has pushed back its contractions call to the middle of the year. It will be extremely difficult to fine-tune this to bring inflation down with only a half-point increase in unemployment over the next couple of years. Economists also reduced their 2023 forecasts for the Eurozone, the United Kingdom, and 8 of the 10 other countries and regions tracked by Consensus Economics. According to Neil Shearing, chief economist at Capital Economics, the recession's risks are greatest in Europe, where the inflation's induced cost of living crisis is exacerbated by potential gas shortages. The UK and the Eurozone, like the US, are dealing with multi-decade high inflation. A recession in the United States, particularly if triggered by the Federal Reserve's cycle of interest rate hikes, would reduce global import demand and cause financial market chaos. And while recessions in Europe typically spread globally due to the decreased demand, a war-induced slowdown could severely shake business confidence and financial markets worldwide. How likely are each of these occurrences? China's growth trajectory has been slowing for some time, with only good fortune and mostly competent macroeconomic management preventing a severe downturn. However, as I said earlier, if the Chinese leadership makes the wrong decisions on COVID-19, no amount of careful macroeconomic stewardship will be able to save the day. The world's second-largest economy grew 0.4% in the 3 months to the end of June, as strict COVID-19 restrictions slowed economic activity amid a global economic slowdown. As the government reimposed strict restrictions to control renewed COVID-19 outbreaks, the country's economy slowed sharply to 0.4% in the second quarter of 2022, down from 4.8% in the first quarter. In other China recession news, the country's second quarter GDP growth was the slowest since a contractions in Q1 2020 when the first coronavirus outbreak emerged in Wuhan. Although most Asian countries have abandoned zero-COVID strategies in favor of regimes that manage COVID-19 as an endemic threat rather than a pandemic threat. But not China. There, the government is investing heavily in converting vacant downtown office buildings into quarantine facilities. Perhaps the new quarantine centers are a brilliant idea, offering a way to redirect China's bloated construction sector toward more socially useful activities rather than piling more new projects on top of years of overbuilding, as the International Monetary Fund has warned. Perhaps China's leaders understand the urgency of preparing for the next pandemic better than their Western counterparts, in which case the quarantine centers could appear positively visionary. More like China is tilting at windmills in an attempt to contain the increasingly contagious virus, in which case the centers will be a huge waste of resources and the lockdowns will be ineffective. A US recession, particularly if triggered by the Fed's cycle of interest rate hikes, would reduce global import demand and cause market chaos. The likelihood of a US recession has undoubtedly increased, with the main unknowns now being its timing and severity. The optimistic view that inflation will fall significantly on its own and that the Fed will not need to raise interest rates significantly is becoming increasingly doubtful. With savings having risen during the pandemic, the more likely scenario is that consumer demand will remain strong while supply chain issues worsen. True, the US government appears to be reducing its stimulus policies, but this will raise recession concerns even if it helps to moderate inflation. And if stimulus programs continue at full throttle, and why wouldn't they in an election year? It will make the Fed's job even more difficult. Even without the war in Ukraine, Europe's growth would have been threatened by the fallout from economic slowdowns in China and the United States. However, the war has greatly increased Europe's risk and vulnerabilities. Growth is already slowing. If Russia's President Vladimir Putin resorts to using chemical or tactical nuclear weapons, Europe will be forced to cut the cord decisively, with uncertain economic consequences and the risk escalations, which could mean imposing sanctions on China as well. Meanwhile, European governments are under intense pressure to significantly increase their spending on national defense. In the event of a global recession, emerging markets and poorer developing economies will clearly suffer greatly. Even energy and food exporting countries, which have benefited economically from the war due to high prices, are likely to face difficulties. Hopefully, the risk of a synchronized global downturn will have passed by late 2022. But for the time being, the chances of a recession in Europe, the United States, and China are significant and rising, and a collapse in one region increases the chances of a collapse in others. Inflation at an all-time high does not help matters. I'm not sure politicians and policymakers are up to the task ahead of them. The United Kingdom, on the other hand, must be added to this list because it is most likely already in recession. The war in Ukraine has taken a heavy toll on Central Europe, and there are a slew of emerging countries in deep trouble, including Lebanon, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, which is on the verge of bankruptcy, and Turkey, which is being battered by inflations of up to 80%. The International Energy Agency has warned that Europe must immediately prepare for a complete cessation of Russian gas exports this winter. A block recession would become the new normal, and the German economy would bear the brunt of the damage. A strong post-lockdown recovery in pandemic-affected sectors, particularly travel and hospitality, should be enough to sustain the Eurozone economy over the summer. As such, next year's economy could be slightly bigger than before the pandemic. We have reached the end of this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe so that you can stay updated on other upcoming videos like this. Goodbye for now.